to horror cinema, general audiences tend to get a little stuck in certain places. Like a scream queen running from a slasher, it's easy to charge down an alleyway you're already familiar with, rather than one you've not been down before. This is why a lot of casual horror audiences tend to stick with what they know. While countries like the US, Japan, and more deserve their reputations as horror experts, there are plenty of other places making nightmare-inducing movies, and one that's often overlooked is Taiwan. Taiwan is a country that's not particularly known for its cinema, yet it has come out with some phenomenal horror movies that will keep you entertained all night, mainly because you won't be able to sleep after watching them. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with 10 terrifying Taiwanese horror movies you need to see. Number 10. The Bride. It's great when a horror movie can take something ordinary and make it terrifying. But it's even better when it can turn an already creepy/bizarre practice into a full-on horror show. And that's what happens in this Taiwanese scare flick. The Bride follows a young man who is having the time of his life. His career is going well and he has a loving fiancée. But things take a sudden turn for the worst after he picks up a red envelope on the street and becomes the subject of supernatural events. Meanwhile, a teenage girl with the ability to see ghosts is haunted by a vengeful spirit. This movie is inspired by ghost marriages, a custom which originated in China but has seen practice across the globe. In this tradition, one or both parties in a marriage are deceased. But it's not the same as being a widow. No, it's the act of actively marrying a dead person. If that doesn't spell a strong ghost story, then what does? The film is incredibly creepy with a rich atmosphere and some big plot twists. While it doesn't alter the supernatural haunting formula much, the connection to a real-life custom does give it a fascinating edge. Number 9. Soul. Nothing is more powerful than a parent's love, not even possession. Well, no, actually, on second thoughts, possession is a pretty strong contender. But that's precisely what makes this movie so compelling. In Soul, a young man is sent to live in the care of his father after experiencing a slew of random blackouts. The son claims that he is possessed by the spirit of a psychopathic killer. Still, rather than sending him to the police, the father attempts to exorcise it himself. Part of what makes this film so great is that it grounds itself in the relationship between the father and son. The compelling sense of fatherly duties, family, and love make the story easy to invest in and cause some of the more brutal scares to be all the more frightening. This naturally means that the movie is carried by the believable, nuanced performances. Both starring actors deliver solid turns in this complex story, making the relationship all the more poignant. Overall, it's a touching and charming film, despite the rather harrowing subject matter. Number 8. The Heirloom. There's a deep well of tropes and cliches that horror movies can delve into when looking for a nice setup. You've got hot topics like murder-infested summer camps, zombie outbreaks, demonic possession, and one of the oldest in the book, the classic haunted house. This movie delves into the latter, and while it's far from flawless, it's a real haunting watch. After living abroad for many years, a man named James returns to Taiwan to live in his newly inherited family home. However, it becomes apparent pretty soon that something malicious is happening in the house as James and his girlfriend start to experience increasingly bizarre events. It seems they aren't alone. The Heirloom is a loving exploration of the haunted house story, and while it doesn't do much to reinvent the genre, it does ground it with slow burn pacing. It takes the time to establish mood and atmosphere, making for some incredibly tense moments and shocking imagery. This flick also plays with some real-life practices which cannot be discussed for the sake of making this entry spoiler-free, but it's safe to say that there are some shocking revelations in the plot that will leave you horrified. Number 7. Double Vision. This film holds a solid place in Taiwanese cinema as it was produced by Columbia Pictures' Asia branch, meaning it's a loving combination of Hollywood and Taiwanese horror. It helped to further the country's filmmaking influence and stands very firmly as one of the most commercial cinematic ventures in Taiwan's film history. Double Vision pairs a Taiwanese detective with an FBI agent as they hunt down a serial killer. However, this murderer is far from ordinary, as all of their killings have bizarre and unnatural causes causes of death, it soon becomes clear that something far more sinister and possibly spiritual is at play. You'll undoubtedly feel the Hollywood vibes if you've seen things like Seven or The X-Files, as the film takes a page out of the books of such classics. It's macabre and dripping with atmosphere as the killer's crimes and the detectives' lives begin to bleed into each other. Despite the comparisons, the movie still stands on its own 2 feet, thanks to the influence of Taiwanese and Chinese mythology. Overall, Double Vision is sharp, gritty, and has a compelling sense of mystery, proving that Taiwan has the potential to hang with Hollywood itself. The killer's motive also ties deeply into Taiwanese folk beliefs, making it a rich cultural horror. Number 6. The Tag-Along. If there's one thing that can scare the pants off of anyone, it's real-life urban legends. Sure, you don't often believe these kinds of stories, but seeing a scary tale given that realistic edge makes it all the creepier. The Tag-Along is a film that banks on this, as it's based on a real Taiwanese legend. Don't watch this one if you're afraid of true stories. The Tag-Along is the cinematic retelling of a story called The Little Girl in Red. In this tale, a family is mired by tragedy as one of their friends has passed away, but things get weirder after the group looks back on video footage of their recent hike and discover that they were being followed by a girl wearing red. The movie expands on this story, adding more mystery and turning the girl into a demonic entity. If you like urban legends, then you won't miss with this one. There's a constant sense of dread as the villainous demon girl is as scary as little kids can be, and the family drama helps keep the plot anchored. The flick even went on to have 2 sequels, so you'll get plenty of bang for your buck if you enjoy it. Number 5. Silk. It's surprisingly rare to see genre crossovers in horror. Spooky flicks tend to stay focused on one subject, like ghosts, monsters or killers, in order to keep the audience on board. But this movie says screw that and ambitiously combines sci-fi with supernatural elements. It makes for quite the pretty/creepy cocktail. The movie follows a scientist who has created a device that can harness the energy of supernatural spirits. He and his colleagues attempt to use the device on the ghost of a young boy, all while attempting to communicate with him. However, things take a shocking turn as the circumstances of his death become apparent and their actions begin to bite them. Typically, science fiction and ghost stories don't gel well, as they are diametrically opposed. One side is hard science, the other spirituality. But this movie makes it work as it focuses on mystery rather than drowning as a genre movie. The slow and deliberate pace keeps you engaged as you discover more about the ghost child before the big shocks and scares manifest in the climax. It's a stylish film that takes its time and unravels slowly. Plus, it came from one of the co-writers of the script for Double Vision. Thus, it's no surprise the mystery elements are so strong. Number 4. Detention. Some mediums go incredibly well together, but video games and movies are not one of them. Video game movie adaptations have been the bad egg of cinema for decades now. Still, sometimes gold slips through the cracks, and this horror flick is one of those escapees. Based on the video game of the same name, this movie takes place in the 1962 White Terror, a period of martial law in Taiwan, and shows 2 students stuck inside their school. While there, they are haunted by the sins of their past in this oppressive world where free speech, education, and happiness are hard to come by. Oh, and there are ghosts, of course. It's a solid reinterpretation of the game, as it takes all the atmosphere of the title and successfully molds it into the feature-length runtime, adding enough to make it feel fresh while staying faithful to the source material. However, even without pre-existing knowledge of the video game or the historical context, the movie still holds up incredibly well. It's well shot, with plenty of darkness hiding the shoddier visual effects and painting a tense atmosphere. Plus, the narrative is a twisting well of intrigue, drama, and emotion. Number 3. Mon 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 Monsters. Typically, when watching a monster movie, you spend the whole time worrying about the main characters and hoping they don't become appetizers. But Mon 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 Monsters flips that formula on its head, because in this movie, you kind of feel worse for the monster. Lin is a young schoolboy who is bullied by everyone in his class. After being framed for stealing money, he's sent to perform community service with a group of his worst bullies. But things take a bizarre turn after they stumble across a monster. They capture the creature and let all their worst desires out as they torture it. This is the kind of film that will make you lose your faith in humanity and want to punch pretty much every character in the face. The leads have brilliant chemistry and play off each other perfectly, which makes their cruel acts all the more insufferable. These juvenile delinquents perform awful deeds without a care, all except for Lin, who is at odds with himself thanks to the guilt. This gives the movie a powerful message about bullying and peer pressure. It's also an incredibly good-looking flick with solid cinematography, a bouncing soundtrack, and bright lighting not often seen in horror. Number 2. Incantation. Found footage is a horror subgenre with a lousy reputation, as it's considered cheap, easy to produce, lazy, and entirely oversaturated. However, this 2022 film shows that there's still life in the old dog yet. Incantation tells the story of a woman who broke a religious taboo years ago and now finds herself facing the consequences. She documents herself through video logs as she and her daughter become victims to supernatural events, all the while revealing more and more about her past mistake. This film plays with the genre wonderfully as it tells the story non-chronologically. You cut between the past and the present, mixing between docufilm and camera footage. The documentation allows the lead to talk directly to the audience, giving you a clear hook into the film and turning what could have been a derivative movie into a compelling piece of meta storytelling. Despite its found footage format, it's beautifully shot and makes terrifying use of trypophobia, so if you've got a fear of closely packed holes, like me, then you're in for a bad time. The film also has a prominent platform on Netflix, so it could potentially be a big step for Taiwanese horror cinema. Fingers crossed. Number 1. The Sadness. Sometimes you finish watching a horror movie and think, I'm glad I didn't watch that on a full stomach. Let's just say if you manage to make it through this one without feeling queasy, you've got an iron gut. The Sadness shows as Taiwan is struck by a terrifying virus that turns all its victims into bloodthirsty maniacs. You follow a young couple as they attempt to reunite and survive the rampage of the Alvin virus. This movie is utterly barbaric, as it's bursting at the seams with some of the most grotesque and disgusting gore you'll ever see. But the horrifying body horror is just the start, as you'll encounter every form of violence here, including physical, emotional, sexual, and more. It's a thrilling movie with a simple story, incredible special effects, and a solid hook thanks to the dual protagonists. You could even argue that it's Taiwan's answer to 28 Days Later, in that it's about as close as you can get to a zombie movie without any actual zombies. Of course, the social parallels are also powerful, as it plays with governmental responses to pandemics, media coverage, and accusations of hoaxes. Now, why does that sound familiar?